Welcome into another Rivermen alumni interview. And before we get started with our very special guest, we want to let you know this conversation is presented by Ameren, Illinois. Get reliable energy for your home every day. Visit amerenillinois.com to learn more. All right, our next Rivermen alumni interview features a more recent Hall of Fame inductee. Back in 2019, winger Butch Kaebel made his way onto that wall in Carver Arena, and we're with him now. Butch, how you doing on the pontoon in Minnesota?
Well, I spend my days on the ice, and when I get a chance to get off the ice, I like to get to the lake. And so I thought it'd be nice tonight. It's a beautiful sunny day in Minnesota. Why not be out on the lake talking to you? So, yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I could understand wanting to spend a night on the lake. Talking to me, maybe not so much, but we we're gonna go down memory lane here, Butch. Talk about a lot of things, and what's really cool about your career, you spent 6 seasons with the team. I think a lot of the fans watching this kind of know the story, so we'll jump over certain areas, but parts of 6 seasons, the IHL and ECHL iterations of the Rivermen. But what's really cool about your story, and guys like Alec Hagman can relate to it with the present day team, is you were a local boy. So when it comes to the Rivermen and pro ice hockey in Peoria, for you, it starts way before you ever put a jersey on, and it goes back to your childhood. So take us through that.
Yeah, let's go way back. We were talking, in the 60s, the Olsons brought hockey to the Central Illinois area. Pekin Arena was the first indoor hockey rink south of Chicago. So I started playing hockey in the Pekin Arena. My uncle Bruce Bennett played for the Pekin Stars, Kinley Courts, Bob Courts, all these great Pekin Stars players that I looked up to and watched them play the Peoria Blades and the Olsons. And there's so many great players from the area. I mean, they brought players from Canada in to play for those teams. It's an amazing history if you go back and look at the Springfield Kings and the Peoria Blades, the Pekin Stars. It was some fun hockey back then. My dad introduced it to me when I was young, 3 years old on Lake Arlen and Pekin, and then threw some equipment on me. And boy, I couldn't get enough of it. From day one, my dad said I was I was a little weak at first. I scored a goal, and he said that was it. The light bulb went on. So that's a way back when, and starting in the 60s back then.
But what's also cool, Butch, is we're coming up on the 40-year anniversary of pro hockey in Peoria. You mentioned the Blades, but also the Prancers. Now, story goes, and you can confirm or deny this. I think I heard somewhere, whether it was through Cleve, it probably was through Cleve, that you claim you were there. Again, you play an important part of this team's history as a player, but I believe you were there like at the very beginning as a fan seeing the Prancers that first year, right?
I was there the very first home game for the Prancers. I was there. I watched them. I couldn't get enough of it. I kept telling my mom and dad that someday I'd love to play there for the Prancers, and then it became the Rivermen, and then I was there for the 1985 Turner Cup. I watched on TV the Fort Wayne the Turner Cup there, but I was in 2000 watching it, and also the 1985. But I was there from day one with the Prancers, watching professional hockey in Peoria start up.
That's a crazy story. It's so cool. And as we go back to memory lane, I mentioned David Menian, who you and pretty much everybody knows as Cleve, but I'll say the first and last name for those that don't. And I'm going to reference a few things here from him, some things that you've said. And one of the things I wrote down, because I thought it was really cool, is he had a quote from you going back to the Hall of Fame induction a few years ago where, you said the Rivermen were your NHL dream. And that's a really cool thing because I think, if we take the gloves off here for a second, there's a lot of guys that are always looking up and they're looking ahead and they're looking at places as, well, this is a stop. And I got to do everything I can to, do as good as I can, as quick as I can to get out of here and be on to the next level. Yeah. It doesn't sound like that was you. It sounds like you were just a guy who lived in the moment your whole playing career.
Well, I sure did. I understood that, to be honest with you, hockey was a privilege. I mean, I played junior hockey up in Canada. I saw the talent level. I saw how many great hockey players there are, and to be able to play one game of professional hockey is something to hang your hat on. Let alone play years. And I knew that to ever play in Peoria would be, for me, it was the ultimate prize because it was my hometown, and I always wanted to do it because I watched them for years, and that reality happened, and got to play with a lot of good players, a lot of good coaches. Mr. Sowers, as the owner, was phenomenal to me, and I can't thank him enough. And the Sowers family, boy, they really treated me well, and the whole Peoria Rivermen staff. And we could talk more about that later. But I always looked at it as a privilege to play for the Peoria Rivermen and professional hockey.
One of the things that you had mentioned in an interview with Dave was talking about how cool it was to play with guys like Dougie Evans, who you grew up a fan of, and next thing you know, you're his line mate, or sit next to him in the locker room. But I think even cooler than that to stick to you. Tell me how you felt that first time. You're practicing with the team, but do you remember, like by chance, who was the team you played your first game with the Rivermen? The first time you're putting that jersey on and going out for warm-ups, and this is official. When this puck drops, I've played a game of pro hockey for the Peoria Rivermen.
I sure do. I remember it very well. I remember going to the St. Louis Blues training camp, and then coming to Peoria, and just putting on that Riverman jersey was super special. And like you said, when I was watching, there were some great Peoria Rivermen players that the Hammer. I watched the Hammer play. I was on the ice with the Hammer. I mean, watching him from the stands, Dougie Evans, Rick Hines was a goaltender. These are some old names that I'm throwing out there that I watched. And when I put that jersey on and was able to play with Dougie Evans and learn from him, I really gleaned a lot from him. All the guys. I mean, there was so many great players. It's kind of funny because my career, playing in the IHL, and then it came into the ECHL. So there's a transition of a lot of different players and a lot of different coaching staff. So I was able to play with a lot of NHL players and a lot of great players in my time there.
Let's jump into that, Butch. You sort of segued us in perfectly because you're one of these few guys, and our current coach, Jean-Guy Trudel, of course, did it too with the ECHL. Then he left for a little bit, came back to the AHL Rivermen. You too, you were a part of two different eras, if you want to call them that, the AAA IHL level, and then you directly continued with the team into the AA ECHL level. Now, we talked about how this was your NHL dream, but I am curious from a player's perspective, mentality. Does anything change? Did you feel a certain way about that? Were there opportunities that when the IHL season wrapped up, could you have remained in the International Hockey League and you instead chose to stay in the ECHL? I know I'm playing sort of 20 questions with you in one.
Sure.
Just want to know mentally, what was that like, knowing that, yes, it's the same team name, it's the same jersey, but it's AA, not AAA anymore?
Well, here's the thing. As a hockey player, if we get to really talking about hockey and getting down to the players and helping them understand, I knew who I was as a player. So when you know who you are as a hockey player, I knew that for me to stay at the IHL level, that I was going to be a guy that really forechecked hard. I back checking hard. I blocked shots. I would do whatever it took to win that night for the hockey team. And I wasn't the guy that had to score a bunch of goals and assists and be on that first power play unit. They already had their guys. We had Tony Herkus. We had Steve Tuttle. We had great players that were already there. For me, I didn't have to do that. But the style of game that I played, I could play a long time. So with saying that, when I went from the IHL and then Peoria became the ECHL, I knew my role, and Mark Reeds was there, and he had coached me in the IHL, and he knew the kind of player I was, and that kind of player can fit. Obviously, a great attitude in practice. I always wanted to be the hardest worker in practice. John Guy Trudell is my kind of coach. I know what he demands as a coach. He was like that as a player. John Guy could score and score and score, and he did it really well. Mm-hmm. For me, I didn't have to do that as a player. I had to be counted on every night, and I had to be disciplined every night. I had to be a great penalty killer. But that's kind of how I got my opportunity and kept my job as a player in the IHL and then the ECHL with Peoria.
So I don't know if you already sort of answered that for me, but I guess I'll ask you to spell it out more. I mean, when you look at that transition, did your game change at all? Like Cleve referred to you as that blue collar player. You were hard nosed, just a tough worker. But I mean, that first season in the ECHL, you go from, I think you had a 25-point season. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think it was about a 25-point season your last year in the I with Peoria. And then you had 27 goals and 60-plus points your first year in the ECHL. So knowing the kind of player you were you allowed, or did you allow yourself to make changes? I don't know if finesse is a good word, Butch. Like, were you able to be more of a finesse player in the ECHL, or do you think it was the same working body of being blue collar? It just worked better at that level.
Well, yeah, a couple things. That first year in Peoria that I played in the ECHL, you got to remember that we had a really, really good team, and we had three lines that could maybe not be on the first line, but really we didn't have a third line. And so everybody on that team up front were capable of scoring and making great plays. Like you said, I had, I think, 27 goals that year in the ECHL. And, you
can call it over 60 points too.
Yeah. So it was my best year probably on this as far as stats goes.
Sure.
But I always just bought into what the coach wanted, but I always put a demand on myself that when there's an opportunity to score, you've got to score. You've got to make sure, that you can bury the puck. And I was playing with Paul Vincent that year. And if Vinny was a heck of a, the guy's 6'5". He could really dish. He was a smart player. And I would just find the openings and he could find me. And, I had a pretty hard shot that I could find some openings and get an opportunity and score that year. So, it just worked out. Some years you have a little more success on the stats, but for me, I wanted to make sure I always bought in to the coaches and what they believed in, and all about team.
So, and I'll be honest with you, Butch. In 1992, I don't know if shootout goals counted as actual goals. Did they? Do you know? Because they don't now.
I don't know. I don't think they did. I think you're right. I don't think they counted. I think down the years, maybe they counted the game-winning goal. I think you're right. I think that's how.
Yeah. So like in the SPHL, it's still a game-winning goal. But in the NHL, if a guy scores 10 game-winning shootout goals, he doesn't get 10 goals added to his stats. But you probably obviously know what we're going to talk about here. Because
I do.
March of 92. But here's the thing, Butch, I'm going to try and throw you for a curveball because it is talked about a lot. And that's really, I think, your biggest goal in terms of a claim to fame is the 92 shootout goal. What is it, round 10 or 11 against Ray LeBlanc, who was playing with the Indianapolis Ice, I believe. And he was a U.S. Olympian, an Olympic goaltender, not for the U.S. though. But we've heard the story a few times. What I want to know from your end, and maybe the fans would love to know this too if we haven't talked about it, is recounting the celebration, the guys mobbing you, the locker room feeling. I mean, it's late in the season. What do you remember about that side of it? Outside of tucking the goal in and the guy breaking his stick over the crossbar, that's kind of where the moments stop. Like, we hear everything up to that point. What happens right after that?
That's a great question because no one's really asked me about that. But It's an exciting. The whole night was, as you saw, if people, the fans, they remember that night with JC Bergeron going down, and then we had Mud going in, and it was an incredible shootout, and we had a packed house. It was a big crowd that night, and I know Ricky Pion tackled me and all my teammates, and Mark Bassett and Shoe Bottom, Shoey, and all these guys. And as we go in the locker, well, first off, they did the first, second, third stars, and I was one of the stars. And then we went in the locker room, and I got in there, and the trainer said, "Can you take your equipment off right away? Norm Ulrich wants you up in the booth to get you on the radio." So I hurried up and got my skates off and got up to the booth, and Norm was just ecstatic. He was super excited. And so I did an interview right there, live right after the game, up in the booth in the stands. And I know my mom and dad were able to hear it on the way home, and they were super excited to hear it. And obviously they were there watching the game. And I think it brought a lot for the fans to be able to hear the emotion and the excitement from my point of view and from the Rivermen's point of view, getting ready to go into a playoff run.
Was Mark Reeds, was he still the coach that season? Or no, this would have been before him, right?
Yes, this was Harold Sneps.
What did he say to you?
Harold was, he just patted me on the back, and he'd smile and he'd say, way to go, Butchie, way to go. And that was about it.
That's awesome. It's really cool, too. I'm really glad I asked you that question because you referenced Norm Ulrich. And, that being a broadcaster, of course, I love to talk about Norm. For me, Butch, he's this kind of larger than life character because, unfortunately, I never got to meet him prior to starting in Peoria. But I'd be kidding you if I didn't say that, every home game in Carver Arena, sometimes you like to walk on the concourse and you go past that wall of fame. There's so many great players. But for me, I look at him and I think, that's a guy to look at. His calls, his voice, so iconic. And, you heard Norm before playing where,
yes,
as a fan. So, some players, we talked about earlier how players look up, whatever. Well, truth be told too, like players do give generic responses. They say things that, they know they're supposed to say.
Sure.
I don't get that feeling from you about Norm. I think there's a lot of authenticity there because this is a guy that not only did you listen to as part of the soundtrack to your childhood, but maybe a guy you became friends with when you were on the team. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, very much so. And he was a big part. To be honest with you, I got to tell you, the first time that I was in the car and I'm listening to Norm, and I turned to my dad and I said, "Dad, he is so good. He sounds like," my favorite announcer was Dan Kelly. My dad, we grew up listening to Dan Kelly, listening to St. Louis Blues games. So when I heard Norm, I said, "Dad, Norm sounds like Dan Kelly. He is amazing." I mean, he made you feel like you are in the bleach, in the stands, and you're watching that game and you can feel the emotion. He was that good and that detailed. And so that's where I started, obviously, hearing Norm. And then, obviously, playing for the Rivermen, was able to meet him. And then, obviously, had a friendship with him. And it was such an honor to be able to go into the Hall of Fame with him that night because he was a special friend, that's for sure.
Yeah, Dan Kelly, that would have been, I believe, on KMOX radio back in the day.
Yeah, you got it.
So that's old school there. But I did want to ask because, of course, then you guys end up going to the Hall of Fame the same night together. Unfortunately, Norm not able to be there for that. But, we talked about your role and how it, may or may not have changed on the ice. But when you start as a rookie versus year 5 and year 6, and now you're a veteran, Butch, your role, I think, does change off the ice. And you already referenced Jean-Guy Trudel on this interview. I can tell you, talking to him back on Rivermen Day, when I asked him about when he came to Peoria, who were some of the guys that made him feel welcomed? He said the Kaebel brothers, Butch, Carlson, those were the guys that among players helped him get acclimated. So how did your role change off the ice? I think it's fair to say that it probably did, because you all of a sudden do become more of a leader in that dressing room, and maybe more of the welcoming committee to bring the new players in.
Yeah, you're right. When you have a guy like John Guy Trudell came in, and he was such a phenomenal rookie, and you could see that he was going to have a really good hockey career. And I knew back then, I said, this kid's going to make to the NHL. I could just see it. You could see it. But as a player, and I think it's super important for the veterans to lead by example. Number one, your conditioning. What kind of work ethic do you have? And I'm not saying just in the practice, but in the summertime, in the off season, are you preparing for the season? Because a lot of guys would come in and they start skating in August, or start riding the stationary bike. For me and my brothers Carson and Clage, we're up in Minnesota, and we started skating in June every year. Not every day; it was 2 or 3 days a week, and then doing off ice training. So we took it very serious, because we knew that was a big part of our game, and also, like you said, it's a leadership role that you have as you get older, that you want to show the rookies or the younger guys how important it is to be in great shape, especially through the dog days. There's always going to be dog days through that long season, and you don't have time to be injured. You got to be in great shape to be able to go through those days. And I think that was a big part of it, leading the team as an older player. Also, your eating habits. You're going to just throw anything in your mouth. You go in the Riverman room now, I'm sure John Guy's got the guys have protein drinks, and they're recovering, getting ready for the next game. I believe that was a big part of it. And then practicing every day as hard as you can. You can't go through the motions. Mm-hmm. If John Guy's going to have a practice for an hour, you got to go hard for an hour. If he's going for 30 minutes, you go hard for 30 minutes, but you give 100%. And I think those are the big leadership skills that I had, that I was pushing the younger guys.
Yeah. Do you, speaking of younger guys, Butch, as we go from the 90s all the way up to 2021 now, is that missing in today's game? Like, I really love talking to you and other alumni players and getting your stance on the philosophical side, because I think I was talking to Tyler Renette, was our last interview we did, another Riverman Hall of Famer like yourself. And he's coaching in the NAHL. I know you are still involved in hockey from a coaching and teaching side. You have a son in the game as well. Is that hard too? Like, you talk about off-season conditioning, you talk about eating, and I don't think it was as big a problem in the 90s, but now you probably got to talk to your kid about, or the kids about, hey, don't spend too much time on video games, or don't spend too much time on your cell phone. I mean, have you noticed things like that? And do they, not that you want to be the old guy, get off my lawn kind of person, but yeah. You see those things, and do they irk you a little bit?
Sure. What I do now, I'm training little guys all the way up to the pros. And so, I'm getting calls from agents all the time in Minnesota to skate with their players or their clients. And the business is big now. And that the money in the NHL is more than it's ever been. Guys know that if they can play longer, they can make more money. Guys that are younger are hungry to get into the NHL. It's the best league in the world. They want to get there, and the commitment level is off the charts now. I see it. I'm at rinks in Minneapolis, St. Paul every day, and I see the pros training, and I see what they're doing. I see what they're doing off the ice, and if you don't have that commitment level and that mindset, you're probably not. It's going to be tough to make it nowadays. It just is. It's a whole new world out there.
But that affects some of the development, does it not? Like, seeing the kids that that are going through the teenage years. Hey, I'm young too. You're talking to a 26-year-old, but I'm just curious about how the game goes, because even like locker room talk, like, back in the day, it was probably guys with What, go ahead. Yeah. What was it like
It,
versus now? I bet a lot of kids are
it,
in their cell phones now.
it was fun. That's what it was. It was so much fun back then. It was that was part of the love of the game, was being with the guys on the buses, on the flights, in the locker room. Now, I don't know what it's like nowadays. I'm guessing I'm guessing it's guys are on their cell phones, and it's guys are afraid to make a mistake because everything's social media. When I played, everybody, it was the good old boys, and we had a lot of fun playing hockey. That's for sure.
Hey, one of those boys was your brother Carson. You mentioned you played with him a year in Peoria. Your other brother, who was in Tulsa,
Yep.
did you end up playing with him too?
Yes, we all three played together in Tulsa in 2000, 2001. So it was a great year for us. Our coach was Gary Unger,
Yeah.
and Gary, I grew up watching Gary Unger playing for the St. Louis Blues. Had no helmet, blonde hair, no helmet, and there was Gary, number 7 for the Blues. So he was our head coach. It was a fun year.
That's got to be something cool too, though, because I imagine, I mean, how hard is it? You almost have to line that up perfectly that you can end up playing pro hockey with the same kids you probably were on the backyard rinks playing with.
Yeah, it was a blast. My brothers and I, we skated together and trained hard in Minnesota in the off seasons, and then always went to our other, the teams that we were going to in the winter. And that finally that year we were able to play together. I know my mom and dad really enjoyed it, and I want to thank obviously my mom and dad for all of their efforts and all of their sacrifices and hard work, and my mom making all those big meals for us. We were training and trying to gain weight, and my dad obviously always pushing us and helping us get better and supporting us in every area. That was our parents.
So we're talking here on the eve of Father's Day weekend. You're dad yourself with a few kids here. So Butch, tell us a little bit now about what's going on, including your one son Laz, who I believe is committing to the NCDC after a year in the USPHL Premier. Was it?
Yep.
Yeah. So tell us.
Yeah, Laz. Our son Laz is a right-handed defenseman. He got a lot of size from his mama. So Jane's side of the family has height. And so he's 6'3", right-handed D-man. And he's going to play for Dan Hodge this year. Dan and I were teammates with the Rivermen many years ago. And Dan saw Laz play and really liked his game. And so he's going to play in Maine this year with Dan Hodge in the NCDC league. So we're really excited for this year for Laz. I think he's going to have a great year.
That is such a small world. You bring up Haji, who we also have talked to on this series of alumni interviews. How many guys are you still in touch with, and how often do you stay in touch with the people?
That's what's fun about Facebook is you see guys on Facebook and old players and old trainers and Greg Eberle and John Frankrantz, and you see these guys. Darren Beach is on there, and Jason Ruff. A lot of guys are on there, so you're able to see them. Ricky Pion, and you kind of see what's going on in their lives, and so it's kind of nice to be able to have some social media in that aspect.
Well, you needed it over the last year, right? I mean, how did you survive the pandemic? I mean, what kept you busy since March of 2020? Yeah, I'm trying to look at my calendar because I've lost track too.
Well, I was sure missing Rivermen hockey. I'm always excited to watch the Rivermen, and that was painful not to see them. I know Bart Rogers was upset. I know John Gee was upset not playing last year. But the other aspect, Laz was able to play in Florida, so they had a season down there. Up in Minnesota, we actually closed rinks down up here quite a bit, so I wasn't skating that much. What do you do? I watch The Last Dance. I love to watch Michael Jordan on The Last Dance. That was that was fun. But I'm ready to get move on from the pandemic and fill these hockey rinks and watch the Rivermen again this year and Carver Arena packed out.
I think we all are, Butch, and I want you to enjoy the rest of your time on this boat here on this great June day that we're catching you. But let's end it with this.
Sure.
If you didn't know, the Rivermen, it's 40 years of pro hockey in Peoria, dating all the way back to when you were a kid at that first Peoria Prancers game, this being 40 years since then. And
Yep.
the team, to honor that, created a voting poll where we did the top 40 players of all time. The top 40 fan favorites is how it was labeled. We took the first 25. Now, they were all named back in 2006 on a list that Cleve compiled. And then we put I think it was over 200 names over the course from IHL Prancers to SPHL Rivermen. Over 200 names. The top 15 got selected and moved forward. And you were one of those names as one of the top players. So come this year when we honor those top 40 fan favorites of all time, you are one of those guys. I go back to right when I kicked things off about how cool of an interview this is, because the Hall of Fame is awesome too. And the Hall of Fame, I don't know, maybe the Hall of Fame beats it. That's tough because you got that plaque. That's really neat. But at the same time, like, man, a kid, I can't imagine it. A kid with a ticket stub to that very first game, and he's immortalized in the Hall of Fame there, but also recognized as somebody who, fans got behind so much. That kind of accolade.
No, what an honor. I was so humbled by that when I saw that and was able to be in the top 40. I mean, when you look at the hockey players that come out of Peoria and played for the Rivermen, the branches of Rivermen, it's incredible at how many great players have gone through Peoria. I'm actually skating with Chris Porter, that is another one of the top 40 Peoria Rivermen players. Chris and I actually worked together up in Minnesota, so it was kind of fun to see our names there and be recognized. And as you know, Chris is a great guy, and we were really humbled by that, to receive that honor. It's amazing, especially me growing up there and watching from day one the whole 40 years. Geez, 40 years.
Not to age, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
Now, how old would you have been then at that first game?
I think it was about 82. I think is when it was.
Right.
I think it was around 82. I was probably 13, 14 at that time.
That's so cool. Hey, Butch, I will ask you too. You'll have to owe us one. Get me in touch with Chris Porter, because I'm sure the fans would love to hear from him.
I can do that.
We will take it. So, all right. Well, again, talking to 2019 Rivermen Hall of Fame inductee, Butch Kaebel here, one of the top 40 fan favorites of all time. Butch, enjoy the rest of the day. Enjoy the lake. And thanks so much for being here to talk about it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on. And I'm excited. I'm going to be watching you guys all year and watching the Peoria Rivermen have a great year and win it this year.